It's time for Refresh the Cache, the Dynamics 365 Portals podcast on the CRM Audio Network, with your hosts, Microsoft MVPs, Nick Doelman, Colin Vermander, and Shawn Tabor.
Maplytics by Inogic is a market-leading certified for Microsoft Dynamics 365 geo-analytical mapping app. Maplytics empowers users with powerful map visualization and routing capabilities with a dynamic CRM to drive better sales, improve business processes, and engage the right customers at the right time. Inogic is a leading Microsoft Gold Dynamics CRM ISV, delivering best-in-class Dynamics 365 solutions as well as cost-effective and high-quality programming services.
Welcome to the first episode of Refresh the Cache, the Dynamics 365 Portals podcast. I don't think we can get any more niche on this network than we have to this point. But this is great because for me personally, Portals is a topic that we don't always cover a lot in the various shows on the network. I am Shawn Tabor. I'm going to be your navigator of sorts through this process with our experts on the podcast, Nick Doelman and Colin Vermander. Hey guys, how you guys doing?
Doing awesome.
Yeah, very good. Thanks, Shawn.
Excellent. And you know what's great is our hosts are Canadian, so it's going to be a very polite podcast. Very well spoken, very polite. So let's jump right in. Why don't we give our listeners, in case they're not familiar with you guys, you both have been on various podcasts within the network over the course of the last couple of years, but let's go ahead and give an intro to who you guys are, what you do, and what you're wanting to accomplish with the podcast. Who wants to start?
Well, I'll jump in. Or no, Colin,
go.
If you want to go. No, I'm sorry.
See, it was going to be polite.
No, Nick, you go first.
Yeah, this could go on, so I'll just dive right in.
Okay, I'm going to go. Nick, you go.
Fair enough. All right, my name is Nick Doelman, and I am a Microsoft MVP in the business application space. I've been working with CRM since version 1, and I like to say that because I found out that really bugs Gus when you say that, so I'm going to mention that everywhere I can. I've been working with Portal specifically for a couple of years now. I have a few Portal projects under my belt now, and really, really enjoying it. And yeah, it is a little bit niche, but it is, I think, a pretty important part of the whole Power Platform. And when I'm not doing CRM stuff or Dynamics 365 stuff, I compete in powerlifting competitions, and so I like picking up heavy things and putting them back down again.
And you do it very well, very well.
Thanks. Colin,
what about you?
So I'm Colin Vermander. I'm also a Microsoft MVP within the business applications. I entered Dynamics kind of around the CRM4, CRM 2011 time space, and that was when I was involved in network infrastructure, so I was just installing the thing and then kind of walked away from it. But then I kind of walked into a development job, and that development job happened to be building ADXStudio portals with ADXStudio. So I've been working with the portal for about the last 6-7 years, doing lots of portal-focused projects, and probably seen it implemented in a variety of scenarios. I still work with the portals today quite a lot and talk about the portals quite a lot. But outside of that, I like to do a lot of cottage and dock sitting, as well as some sailing now and then. So not lifting anything heavy usually. I usually call on Nick to do that type of stuff. So
heaviest thing you lift is a pint, correct?
Correct.
Is that about accurate?
That's about accurate right now, yeah.
So what's in doing the Portals podcast, when we've been talking about this for the past couple months, you're right. It is a little bit niche, but it is a very important piece of the overall puzzle, especially as the platform's growing. Right? There's more and more we can do with portals. There's more and more we can do with that kind of interaction. So, given that we're now going to have this podcast, what are you guys hoping to provide to our listeners in terms of what we're going to talk about, how we're going to run this podcast, and what they can expect going forward?
Well, I think it's from an education point of view, I think people now are aware that Dynamics 365 does offer a portal option, but it's amazing. Like, I still get a lot of questions from, and even veteran Dynamics 365 professionals. They're asking about the portal. How do we set it up? How do we get started? And then when they do, what's some best practices? And, there are some limitations, and and there's a lot of new features and things that are coming out. But it's not the darling child like, Canvas-based apps or Microsoft Flow is right now, but it is something that I think pretty much every client using Dynamics 365 does want to somehow incorporate it into their overall like external web strategy. So I think it's important to get a bit more of that information out there, a bit of evangelism, but really just want to help people out and kind of, be able to be successful with portals, because if everyone's successful with it, that just, helps everything else be successful as well. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, I would fully agree with Nick. It's about education of the portal technology. The portal really brings this external audience to your Dynamics platform, which you can't do with the Dynamics product in its current incarnation. So it allows that extension of additional audiences that are outside your corporation to participate in that data, which makes it all the more valuable to the corporation. So it really helps the return on investment and the value of that platform to companies. So if we can educate people on the value of that portal and the value of that external audience, then we're just helping push the platform and adoption of it forward even more, and making it available to more and more people.
And I think portals are also, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they're a quick ROI for implementations if they're not familiar with the capabilities that are available for free. Right? There's a lot of capabilities that are just sitting there that you get with a Plan 1 subscription, right?
Yeah.
I mean, just uncovering that alone, I think, is going to be extremely valuable for our listeners.
Yeah, most people probably don't know that a portal add-on is actually included for free with any production instance of Dynamics. So you can go into your Applications tab, and there's a free portal add-on sitting right there that you can configure, and there's all these out-of-the-box starter scenarios that you basically don't have to do any work to start using them right away. So it's really quick to get up and running, and the small investment of time for you to do that.
Yeah, I've had customers say, like, we're using CRM for our cases, and we're, taking cases over the phone or through email. Like, is there a way that we could tie this into our website, or can we build a form that talks to Dynamics 365? And I said, guys, you got a portal. You can use that.
Exactly. So really what this podcast is going to do is going to give great insight from your guys' experience on the portal technology itself, what kind of strategies we've used in previous implementations. I know I'm going through some struggles right now on an implementation myself, and that's just for lack of experience, right? New features when they come out, especially this October. We have our October release coming up. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the stuff in the release notes a little later in the episode, and just other application news as it relates to the portals. So I think it's going to be, there's a lot of stuff we can talk about every couple weeks to bring portal information to the listeners, which I think is great.
Absolutely.
All right, so I think we have our first topic, and it is a little bit timely since we do have someone, Legacy ADXStudio, on the podcast, and that's the end of V7 ADXStudio portals. So do we want to have a brief moment of silence for that? Do we want to?
Yes.
Yeah, I definitely think so. So now, of course, we got to, there's customers out there that are, I know there's clients that are still using ADXStudio version 7. So what we're really talking about is the end of support. So, maybe going back in our time machine a little bit, for those of you who don't know, the CRM or the Dynamics 365 portals was actually an acquisition, wasn't built up directly within Dynamics or within Microsoft. It came from the ADXStudio company, which Colin used to work for, kind of working for the child of ADXStudio or whatever you want to call it now, that got adopted. But anyway, their product at that time was tying to on-premise. It was actually, it's pretty powerful, and I think sort of still is in a sense, but it was a little bit different in terms of very developer focused. You could create your own custom ASPX page templates and things like that. So that version 7 line officially support ended August 1st, 2008 of this year. So that doesn't mean that, on July 31st at midnight, all of these portals just stopped working. Obviously, they're going to keep working. It's just a matter of Microsoft, 3 years after their acquisition of ADXStudio, their focus now is on the online world. So they kind of shut the door on support for ADXStudio version 7. That probably is making a few customers a little bit nervous. I think there's still some options out there. But for the most part, I found the projects that I worked on that were still using those portals, they were on a good path to migrate, or they were running pretty stable. So it's not like they needed a lot of support anyway. But again, it is something from a strategic point of view that if customers are still running ADXStudio 7 portals, they're going to have to start thinking about what's their next step and what's their plans.
Yeah, there's definitely no time bomb that says you can't keep doing it, but it's probably not in your best interest to not have a plan to get off of it in the long term. So I know we continue as the child of ADXStudio, I guess. We continue to get people all the time contacting us, asking what the heck's going on, because we're often seen as the people that still own it, even though it has been transferred over to Microsoft. And so there's tons of scenarios out there. ADXStudio actually even had an ISV program, so a lot of people other partners would take the ADXStudio portal code and go and re-implement it with their own set of customizations on top of it. So if you can just imagine, like, we weren't only selling direct to customers, that we had partners also selling it. So there are a lot of ADXStudio licenses out there in a lot of different use cases. So when Microsoft adopted the product and started making it their own, they kind of focused on some specific use cases. So not all the use cases that people were using ADXStudio for are natively supported within the new online portals as well. So there's definitely a lot of strategies people are going to have to look at for that migration, or how they're going to figure out their upgrade. Microsoft has provided some upgrade path of some sort as part of the release of the portal source code as well. So there is a PowerShell script that you can run that will actually upgrade your solutions as well as your data to the new community portals, or to the portal source code, and then you can actually import a portal add-on on top of that, and that will take you from your ADXStudio to the portal source code directly to Portals Online. So there is a bit of an upgrade path, but it is in no way perfect, as both Nick and I know from our experiences with it, and it definitely does not meet all of the scenarios out there. So you definitely need to sit down and come up with some strategies, or how you're going to move from one platform to another, and how you're going to continue to be supported.
Yeah. So are those PowerShell scripts available on like docs.microsoft.com, or where would they get those if they wanted them?
I believe they're on downloads.microsoft.com. There should be a link on the docs site, I believe, or I think both Nick and I have blog posts that go over the upgrades that will link out to those. And those PowerShell scripts, I think, are also part of the Community Portals project as well. So they're definitely accessible and free to use. So
what we'll do is we'll put links to both Colin and Nick's blog posts in the show notes. So you'll be able to get to that link and be able to get to their blog if you haven't seen their blog before. So
yeah,
win-win.
And I believe there's also another person in the community that's done a lot with portals. Nicholas Hayduk has I haven't tried it, but he has an XRMToolbox plugin that will actually run that same process on your V7 portal to help migrate it to the online portals.
Okay, cool. Oh, is that the Portal Components Mover?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, yeah, I've seen that tool, and I haven't used it, but I've seen that tool. So we'll add information about that in the show notes as well.
Yeah. So yeah, it's but it's, of course, it's like there's no easy button in this process. Like if you have a fairly straightforward, I think certain portals like the custom portal or the community portal, those can be targeted. But of course, if they have custom page templates, you got to find a strategy to deal with those. And if you're using other things like the conference portal or even e-commerce or something like that, this requires a complete sit down and figure out what you're going to do, because there is no direct upgrade path for those particular portal components.
Well, and like the conference portal, that's really, you want to have a bigger conversation there on whether or not you want to even move to events in D365 marketing, for example, and use the assets that add-on provides as well, because that gives you a lot more or a lot of the same information that was and abilities that was in the conference add-on, if I remember correctly. Plus, it gives you the integrated experience with marketing. Yeah. Am I off base there? Or?
Nope, 100% correct. The ADXStudio event management was actually shuttered as a result of the marketing initiative. So.
Right. So you can see that's where you might want to have a bigger conversation on. It might have been portal specific before, but now it's a bigger platform kind of decision for your implementation.
Yeah, so I think that the good news out of all, like obviously there's good news and bad news, but the good news is there's plenty of options to kind of build on some of your initial investments, although it might require a little reinvestment. But again, in the long term, replatforming some of your portal components will just make there'll be a bigger payoff in the long run. Bit of pain now, but there are definitely different ways and different strategies. So it's not like it's a complete dead end.
So if with October's release, there's going to be some on-prem bits updated, obviously. Now, being on-prem, they don't have to necessarily take that because they can just stay on where they're at. But if they upgrade it, do we know or foresee any issues with on-prem ADX v7 portals with that update? Do we have any kind of understanding on that causing a problem, or?
Colin might have an opinion. I think in theory, and I'm using air quotes here, it should work. But again, there's going to be a point where you can't. There's your solutions are going to be so out of whack from your on-premise. So let's say there's an on-premise version 9 that we know now is coming, that we can say publicly is coming.
Right.
But let's now assume that version 10 comes out a while later, or a version after that. By that, there's going to be a point where version 7 is just not going to work anymore. Right. So whether the version 7 works on 9, and again, because we're no longer supported, so Microsoft's not, obligated to make sure it works on the on-premise version 9. And we haven't gotten the bits for version 9 on premise yet either to even see if it works. So great question, Shawn, and I think it's something we might just have to revisit again down the road when the version 9 bits kind of get into our hands.
Yeah. And I think this is a really good point for customers, especially on-prem, that even though you're up and running and you're okay as of right now, with this retirement of support, it's time to have that conversation of what's happening with your portal framework. Are you moving to the cloud? Are you staying pat? What are you doing? And also looking at and understanding which portals you've implemented from ADX and which are moving forward in the platform in general. Because if you find I'm not clear on all the portals that aren't moving forward in with cloud. The conference one is a good one, but we have event management. So looking at those kind of things and understanding where you're going to need to move is important to start talking about right now, even though you may not be doing anything in October.
Yeah, for sure. And then even something like the e-commerce now. In my experience, I've built one e-commerce portal. For the particular client, they never actually launched it. They had a few, I don't say political issues of why it never actually got launched, and I think it's a blessing in disguise because of this kind of end of life that eventually came around on that particular portal. But if I was to revisit the client today and say, okay, we need to build an e-commerce, I would be thinking, you know what, you might be better off to build something in Shopify, for example, and then use, we now have Microsoft Flow and Logic apps. We have other ways to make that integration seamless with our Dynamics 365 systems. So again, there are other options, and as much as we love Microsoft, some of their other options may not be a Microsoft solution.
Yeah, I think the key thing to remember is that ADXStudio 7 is written on the version 6 SDK of CRM. Actually, when Microsoft acquired it and when they moved to Dynamics 365, there was a huge authentication change, and they actually got rid of what they call the ACS endpoint. And that caused a huge disruption for ADXStudio customers that were using cloud solutions, but an on-premise ADXStudio version 7 portal. So Microsoft actually had to put out a patch to the version 6 SDK while they were actually working on the version 9 SDK. That is not something that's likely for them to do again. So if there is such a breaking change in the platform like that, then ADXStudio customers will be, or people using ADXStudio will be in quite a predicament as a result. So definitely look at your upgrade path and how you're going to either get to the community at the very least or get to the online edition.
Well, we don't want to talk specifically about things that are ending. This is a time of growth, time of rebirth. It's a new release coming, right?
It is.
So, again, check the show notes for the links that we talked about for everything related to the end of ADXStudio V7. But if you have additional questions on, maybe you have something in your particular instance that you want to ask us about, you can send an email to voice@crm.audio, and we'll get that. And then on the next episode, maybe we'll go to the mailbag and answer some questions. But just let us know what we can answer, we will, and what we can't, we'll refer you to your partner. So let's move on. Let's talk about the new things coming. We have a new release coming in October. Very exciting. We've had release notes out since Business Application Summit. I always get tangled up on that. I don't know why. Actually, I do know why. When I worked in financial services, my support team was broker application support, and I always want to say that instead of Business Application Summit. Anyways, I digress. So let's talk about the new release, and there's a lot of really cool things for portals that, as someone that's not a portal expert, I'm happy to say that I'm not, but I saw stuff that I was even myself, I was thinking, wow, that's something we've been wanting that for a while. So why don't we talk about some of the things that you guys have seen in the release notes that have really piqued your interest and made you think that's a really good something coming for the users in the October release.
Sure. So there's 6 things that are coming out. There's six things that are highlighted in the release notes, and that document, it's 225 pages or something like that. So so there's and there was 7 pages for the portals, which is still, if you figure out how big the platform is now, that's still pretty substantial. Mm-hmm. The first item on the list, they talk about configuration migration, and this is very important when you're considering working with portal data and moving it. So for those of you who've worked with portals a little bit, and maybe those of you who don't know, the portal configuration isn't necessarily stored in source code files or things like that. The configuration where you set up your web pages, entity lists, entity forms, and all that fun stuff, it's stored as Dynamics 365 data records. And there's, I think, last count, 60-something entities, potentially the portal. No, maybe a bit less, maybe 30-something, but still, we're talking dozens of entities that hold portal data. So if you're working on a sandbox or development environment, and then you want to, quote-unquote, move your portal from your sandbox to your production, or from your sandbox to your UAT, you got to figure out how to move all that data out of your system into your destination system, and just the portal data. So that's been the bane of the existence, and there's no clear-cut strategy. So at Microsoft's, even they say it's an unsupported solution, but what they call their sort of semi-official solution was using the configuration migration tool, which I believe, and Colin, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, was created specifically for the unified service desk to move that configuration. So as it stands, the tool, it works, but it's kind of an all or nothing kind of process. And even then, I find a lot of issues with it. So what they're saying in the release notes is they're doing some enhancements to that to help kind of craft your configuration to more easily move portal data. Now, that's interesting that they're kind of addressing it, but in my mind, there's a tool in the XRMToolbox called the Portal Data Mover that's been out for about 1.5 years now. And initially, it had a lot of issues. It kind of worked, kind of didn't. But the last few versions, the last version especially, I've found has been pretty solid. I've done a couple little videos on it, and as a way to move portal data from one system to another. But I'll let Colin maybe speak a little bit on the configuration migration. He might have some differing opinions than I do on that whole process.
It's a challenging process, that's for sure. I think what they're providing is just some preset schema files that meet their starter templates. So it will be comprehensive enough for those that are using the portals out of the box, but maybe not necessarily comprehensive enough for custom scenarios, or they will have to be enhanced for custom scenarios. It doesn't solve a lot of problems I think that people have, and that the actual portal data mover tool in XRMToolbox somewhat helps solve. The issue with all of the configuration migration tool in a whole, regardless of what you're using it for, is it's kind of an all or nothing. You can only take a whole entity. You can't take partial records of an entity. So if you wanted to move just one web page or just one web template, then it's a little challenging to do that. There are strategies using PowerShell and editing XML files, using PowerShell tools and automating it in a little while, but it's a time-consuming process to build that. So the Portal Data Mover gives you a UI to do that, so it can be a little bit easier for those that are doing one-time moves or just want to move things in a small, simplified way. If you're going to be building product around portals or doing a solution that you're going to be working on for quite a long time, then you're not going to want to probably use the portal data movers. You might want to invest in actually doing all of that PowerShell work.
So if you're someone listening to the pod, you could be thinking, if you don't have a lot of experience with portals, you could be thinking that, wow, there's not a true ALM kind of experience for portals right now. Is that off base or no?
That is correct. Unfortunately.
Yeah, and that's something we'll talk about in future episodes, but it's something important to call out, because these are the kind of things that if you're new to portals, you need to get the information ahead of time before you start going down the path full bore and then getting yourself stuck when you're trying to move from dev to test, for example.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, and we'll talk about strategies for that in future episodes.
Yeah, and I think
you got to give them a little carrot to keep them coming back for episode 2.
We could talk about that for many episodes, I think.
Yes, we could. So, what other features that are coming in the release notes are exciting to you guys?
I think the one that's probably the top of the idea site is the SharePoint documents. I think that one's probably the most voted up on there. It's been there since Microsoft took it over and kind of took out the SharePoint functionality that ADXStudio had within there. There was very good reason that it got taken out. SharePoint at the time did not have a server-to-server based authentication, so you had to use like a service account with the ADXStudio configuration, and that really didn't work with the model that Microsoft was doing for the portal at the time. Since then, the SharePoint SDK has been expanded, and they have kind of now support for a server-to-server based authentication. So it looks like the Portal team has made use of that, and that's kind of allowed them to have the return of that type of feature set. So I think a lot of people are going to be quite excited about that one, because that's been something a lot of people have been asking for, and it's been definitely something I know we've missed in a lot of implementations because it hasn't been there.
It's one of those features that was I know we're not talking about the past, but it was there essentially and got taken away, and now it's back.
Yeah.
Well, but now it's back leveraging the server-based integration, which is great.
Oh yeah, it's it's back. And like as Colin was saying, there's reasons for it, but it was from the end customer that was used to that feature, then all of a sudden, it got taken away for good reasons. Right. It's like it's a young kid in a sharp toy. It's like don't play with this until you're older.
Yeah. But I want my pointed stick.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't run with it.
No, exactly. But that's always something that when you're talking to a customer about enabling portals, that is one of the first things they always ask for. So can they get to documents if we put them on the case? Well, that was always that conversation, which is always fun.
Yeah,
but
I mean the big thing is dynamic storage costs a lot more than SharePoint storage or blob storage. So you could always store documents with the portal, but they went in this very unusable way because they were stored as note attachments or annotations within the Dynamics database. So it was this great way of bloating your CRM database at the same time. So SharePoint allows you to offload all that document storage from the CRM database or from the Dynamics database and move it over to a SharePoint database, which if you're with Office 365, you probably have at least a terabyte of that included. Mm-hmm. So it makes it a lot better and a lot more accessible of those documents to a lot of users. Plus, you can add metadata and do a lot of other things with that type of information. So,
well, and speaking of, like we spoke earlier about the Power Platform, right? One of the big things that we're seeing across really this entire release is the enablement of exposing more Power BI visualizations. That's not just portals coming, but it's also, in Power Apps. It's in, the unified interface forms. You're seeing that everywhere. So, how is being able to embed those Power BI visualizations a really powerful component of a portal page? What is that doing for people that don't understand what that's going to provide to a portal customer?
Really cool reports and visualizations, definitely. I mean, you don't have to now invest in figuring out how to plot your own data or come up with the chart library that you're going to use or use the older CRM-based charts. So it really takes your reporting requirements and kind of allows you to put them on steroids and use all the power that Power BI has and just enable it to your portal users. So it's going to be great to do that because the reporting store with the portal hasn't always been the greatest in the past.
Right. Now that doesn't impact the type of license that the portal user has in terms of Power BI, right? It doesn't require them to have a Power BI premium license.
According to the release note or the release notes on the top of page 55, it says embedded Power BI content will be available to portal users who don't have an account for Power BI.
Cool.
So,
and now, I love how you referenced the page.
Well, it's right in front of me, Shawn. So
yeah, I know, but it was like it's documented. They said it. We're going to hold them to it, and now we recorded it.
Exactly.
It also says administrators have to have a license, though.
Yes. Well, yeah. But I think it's there's always the caveats, right? So in order to access, like we all know, to even access the portal, if you're an employee of said company and they've decided to implement a portal as a particular user interface, for their own staff, as opposed to, the full-blown Dynamics 365, or even, creating a custom app or a Power App of some sort.
Right.
Those users are still beholden. They do still require a license. It's just a matter of how you're consuming that. So in this particular aspect, I believe, I'm just sort of extrapolating here, but the PowerBI licensing would probably be applying to that too if they were employees. But I think this statement is really more for the, for if you have a portal for your community or your customers and they want to, log in and they'll see a chart of their, consumption of services over the last month or something like that.
It'd be really interesting to understand, especially with some of the cool templates that Power BI is providing, like the template for field service and project service, for example. If you have partners coming in through the partner portal, and those partners are taking actions in field or project service, what is that? What kind of licensing impact does that have for those visualizations? Do they consider that not a direct employee, but a indirect employee? Those kind of, I'm sure we'll shake that out once the October release comes out and gets more communication from Microsoft. But that's, I think, for me personally, doing a lot of field and project service implementations, that's where those visualizations would be super powerful on the portal, especially in that partner portal, right? Bringing in the PSA and field service data from that Power BI template, customized and configured for my implementation, and being able to expose that on the portal by partner, specific to their business, how they're interacting with the organization that we're implementing Dynamics 365 for. So that sounds very exciting.
Yeah, it'd be really cool. But you know what you should do for this as an aside, your next niche podcast channel, or it should be just on Dynamics 365 licensing. Like you would have enough content there, because it changes on a weekly basis, to have a podcast forever. Now, I'm not sure you'd have 4 or 5 listeners total, but
right. Well, and that might be more a video, like a vlog, and in the vein of the old Masterpiece Theater, where you have an older gentleman with a pipe in a resplendent leather chair, opening this big tome of facts and figures about licensing. So that would be oof. We'll get George to do that one.
Licensing with George. Oh yeah, I'd listen to that.
Yeah, so they won't be able to tell if they can't understand it because it's the licensing text or it's George. Who knows? But we'll get George to do that. I'm sure he'll love the shout out. We got a couple other items on the release notes that you guys wanted to point out with simplified customization and self-service portal diagnostics. So what's big and important there?
Well, I think the simplified customization, and they weren't really, again, there's not too many specifics on that, but for anybody who's configured portals, it's kind of one of those things. It's like snowboarding. It's easy to start, but very difficult to master. Or maybe that was skiing, one of those winter sports. So you can get a portal up and running pretty quickly, but then when you start to dig in and you start creating pages, and you realize just to get a page up with some data on it, you need to configure a web page, you need to configure like an entity list, you need to drill down to some other entity forms, then you want content snippets. So one page could actually be represented by 5 or 6 different record types when you're configuring the portal, if you're configuring it through the Dynamics 365 interface. So a lot of people who've worked with content management systems are used to a more drag and drop experience. Mm-hmm. Now, the portals definitely has a certain amount of that. Well, I wouldn't even say drag and drop, but there is a front-side editing component for adding content, and you can add files and things like that. But then when you start to get into the deeper stuff, this is the path I believe they're beginning to head down, is to make it a little bit more geared toward your kind of content manager, as opposed to your folks that can navigate Dynamics 365 inside and out and sideways. So I don't think the October release we're going to get to that WordPress level of configuration, but I'm hoping it's at least a step in the right direction.
Yeah. It's definitely meant to remove that barrier of entry to the portals itself, so you don't have to even know Dynamics or know it exists. You're just working with a CMS-based technology. So I think they'll be definitely taking some stepping stones to getting towards that WordPress. But yeah, as Nick said, I think there's going to be a long way to go to get there. They will have things that are way cooler perhaps than WordPress as well, just because they're working with the Dynamics platform in general and able to surface a lot of business data. So it should be interesting to see what they actually have for that simplified customization as part of that.
Would you ever see a point where the portal experience is really just like a hyper power app?
I mean, the portal sort of is a power app in a way. It's just a different technology and platform to it.
But I mean that kind of config and user experience in terms of building. That's unique to even, the model. I'm not talking model driven. I'm talking more canvas driven.
You're talking about you want front page editor back.
Kinda. Given it's just to me, it seems kind of interesting that from the portal perspective, we're going more to that kind of drag and drop experience like a WordPress, but then we have this other unique experience with Canvas model apps that is even different than the standard Dynamics 365 model driven, right?
Are you speculating on being able to create a public consumable Canvas app?
Right. Yes.
And I think that's it. I think that there's some form of that coming.
But when that happens, what does that mean to a portal? Because it is kind of the same, right? In some ways,
it's the same and different. Yeah, it's interesting to consider that.
Yeah.
To me, at this point, you still, to consume a Power App, you still need to, install the Power Apps player.
Yep.
Or whatever they call it, kind of thing,
yep.
to get that fix your mobile or desktop experiences. And it's still at this point, I can't create like for the project I'm working on now, to their stakeholder, I can't create a Power App for their stakeholders.
Right.
I see that coming, which would be great. But then I think when we're talking about portals, we're almost talking about, you're going to a website and you're immediately able to start consuming and interacting with that website. You don't have to download an app or anything like that.
Right. It'd be interesting to see if there's ever going to be a convergence where portal is a type of format.
And
you know what I mean?
A Power App.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Instead of phone or tablet.
Yeah.
Then there's portal.
Well, I think it's the same idea, like Facebook or YouTube, right? Well, you can access those in the web, or you can download the apps.
Right.
Is Power Apps going to get to that point where you just download the apps?
We'll have to see how they license it.
Well, that's going to be part of the licensing podcast that Shawn's going to put together. George.
George is going to start. Exactly. And we'll release it at 2 a.m. on Tuesdays. Just when everybody wants to listen about licensing.
Yeah, that's great. So keeping all the Australian friends in mind.
Exactly. So what do we think? What do we think about these moves within the release notes? And pure speculation. We're not saying anything we know secret. But what do you see? Do you see an evolution going forward, like with the April release, the spring release, or is this going to be more a slower cadence where we're going to get more and more changes to the portal framework?
The portal team does monthly cadence in terms of updates. Every month they are putting out an update. They've missed a couple of months now and then, but they usually hit them. Whether those months include big features or not, sometimes they're just patches. Sometimes there are little things hidden within them. But I think you're going to see the breadth of the portal feature set continue to expand. I think that's what they're focusing on. It's a pretty stable platform already. They have moved it to being version 9 compatible in terms of the elements that they've added and the code changes they've made behind the scenes, most likely. So I think now they're on about checking off the list of ideas that people have come up with and the things they perhaps have not had the bandwidth or cycles to do in the past. So they're going to expand the footprint and the functionality of it.
I think Portals is following that, where Dynamics 365 is going to be by next spring or already, where everybody's kind of on the same version, or these features pop up. Like a prime example, like it's not a big bang thing, but anybody that's worked with Portals, and the name of this podcast, Refresh the Cache. If you're using Dynamics Online Portals, you know that you have to go to the /about services page, and there's a button that will be Refresh the Cache, so you can kind of clear the portal cache if you're doing some development, things like that, to see the updates. Well, I was working on that 2 weeks ago, and was working away on one day, refreshing the cache, adding new things, changing some liquid templates around. Then I log in the next morning, and there's 2 buttons there. There's the refresh the cache, and then there's another rebuild the indexes. And I'm like, whoa, what's this? And yeah, sure enough, overnight, the Portals team released a small incremental update, and that's sort of the thing they've been doing. Now, for the most part, some of these things have been invisible. There was an update they did last spring that broke a bunch of things, but the team was great. They repaired it real fast. But overall, it's kind of, you talk about the new things that are coming in, the fall release, the April release, and beyond. I think the Portals is to a point where they're not really tied completely to these cycles. Features will just begin to appear, and they'll be in the release. They'll be in the doc site, obviously, but it's kind of a nice thing that you can, all of a sudden there's a new feature coming, and then all of a sudden it's there.
Right.
Yeah.
And you can tune in here to find out what the hell does that do.
Well, probably some of the listeners will probably tell us, "Hey, what does this do?" And we'll be like, "Whoa, we didn't know that was there."
And that's when our guests start coming in. See, that's how that works. That's how podcasts work. But and rebuild the index. That's going to be the name of our after show. That will start in a couple months. So I think we're at a good point to. We've done a lot in this first episode. This has been a good episode.
Well, this is the double size collector's edition, right,
exactly.
Shawn? So you take this home, put it in a Mylar bag with a backing board, and move on.
Exactly. Right next to my 3-pack of Rush Pop Funko Pop heads. So yes, but yeah. So we'll be back in probably 2 weeks, and we'll talk a little bit more about Portals. But again, if you want to reach out to us, you can talk to us you send an email to voice@crm.audio. And guys, why don't you tell the folks how they could reach out to you on the interwebs, whether it's Twitter, LinkedIn, whatever you want to say, and let them know how they can reach out to you.
Sure. So you can find my blog, which will have all of my Twitter, LinkedIn links on it. It's just my full name, colinvermander.com. So my last name is Vermander. It's usually pretty easy, but people usually have trouble spelling it.
We'll put a link to that in the show notes for sure.
Yeah, and always hit me up on Twitter. I am Colin, KOOLIN _.
So was there a Colin already?
There was, yeah. Somebody beat me to it. So.
Well, it's a good deal you didn't go with Colin 1 or 2. What about you, Nick?
You can. I easily searchable on LinkedIn. There's only, I think, about 3 or 4 of us, and it's my cousins that have financial businesses, so you'll know it's me. And then on Twitter, I'm @ReadyXRM, so that's pretty easy to find. And on my blog, my blog actually, it's on WordPress. So yeah, put it in the show notes because I don't have it right in front of me.
I will do it. No worries.
But yeah, also I'll be at the CRM summit in October. So if you happen to be going to that, and yeah, definitely say hi. I'll be doing a couple sessions and probably hanging out at the Medics booth as well.
And Colin, will you be at Summit?
I had to keep the travel schedule light this fall. Last year I kind of killed myself, so I will not be at Summit, but I will be at CRM events in Canada. So locally, I will
Collaborate
definitely be.
Canada coming up, I think.
Yep,
right?
I will be at most of the local ones there with a presence. So for sure, we'll be happy to see people and to talk about portals.
Very cool. And I will also be at CRM Summit. And Nick doesn't know this, but if you come see Nick or I at CRM Summit and mention the podcast, there might be something in it for you. Just saying.
Sweet.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, with that, we'll wrap up our Collector's Edition Episode 1, and we will see you next time when we need to refresh the cache.